Another episode of Variety Viso. Tonight, we gotta get things started right away, so we're gonna just do introductions real quick and everything, but we're reviewing Vice, but we got some special guests with us tonight. Right now, I have Chris Duffy with me in Studio A. And also in Studio A, we have a guest with us, Mr. Basketball.
Yeah, Will. This is Will here. First appearance on Variety Viso, but I'm excited. This is gonna be a good one.
Yes, basketball season is going good, I'm assuming.
Yeah, really good.
Awesome. And the reason why I've been saying Studio A is because in Studio B we have the following people. We have
Alex Perez,
Matthew Lundeen,
and captain of the B team, Jack Coachman.
There it is.
So surprisingly, we have 6 people. Not for a comic book movie, not for like a big action movie. No, surprisingly enough, a political movie about Christian Bale playing Dick Cheney. Almost forgot who he was playing.
A political biopic on one of the most boring but ruthless men in American politics.
All right.
That's inappropriate. He would like that. I would think he'd like that adjective.
Maybe, yeah. We're gonna try to remain unbiased as much as possible. It's
gonna
be
a compliment.
It's gonna be hard when trying to doing a review focusing on politics, of course, and we have to remain unbiased and everything. You guys good in Studio B?
Yes, we're doing great. Can Will hear us? Will, can you hear us?
You can't hear them?
Yeah, okay. That's what I figured.
Yeah, I have trouble with that mic jack, so I think you might just be on the quiet end for them. No, I am going to make that disclaimer right now. For me personally, we all have our own biases, but when we speak of the events of the film, we are speaking of it purely as the film narrative, not as commentary on actual contemporary American politics. This is all within the realm and within the reality of the film because, of course, they do take their own liberties to dramatize events, to heighten the stakes. So when we speak of these events and give our opinion, it strictly is in the realm of film, not of an actual political statement.
Well said.
Yeah, that's probably like the best way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it there. Like, there's some, I wouldn't say shots, but there's some like steps that they take to go to talk about the politics of like the time and back then, and I don't know, it's just how they did it, and we're gonna be more on the film side
because
of it,
they make it engaging, and that's the thing. Like, you have to take some liberty because it is a compelling story on its own, but of course you can't take 40, 50 years of politics, squish it in, and get every single detail and have it be exciting. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to cut some things out. You're going to have to speed some things up, make up conversations that probably didn't happen, just so that way it's for the sake of theater, for the sake of drama, so that way it heightens the emotions of it.
It's almost an art form in and of itself from a writing perspective.
No, of course, especially like adaptation of true events.
It was so compelling. There's 6 people here. So
yeah, we all came to talk about this film. Jack, you want to say anything before we start?
Also, I'm just thinking, like, we're all generally the same age. Maybe there's a 4 or 5 year gap between oldest and youngest among us, but we were all kids or really young through the duration of the vice presidency. Yeah. Obviously, none of us were alive for a lot of Cheney's political career. So, we have biases and stuff, but I'm sure that people who are listening who lived through it may have even more deep ties to some of the events of the movie and some of the personalities. So I'm hoping that gives us a little bit edge on trying to keep it fresh with just what happened in the movie, as Chris said.
Okay. All right, we're going to get things started. We'll do a short synopsis. I mean, do you really need to know what this movie's about? But here you go anyway. The story follows Dick Cheney, literally when he was in college, a drunk dropout, basically trying to move from job to job, trying to basically make a man of himself. This is written and directed by Adam McKay, by the way. We'll bring that up later. But Christian Bale does play Dick Cheney, and his wife, Lynn Cheney, played by Amy Adams, one day just comes into the room and just goes off on him, saying, you need to make a man of yourself. You need to, do something with your life. I hate seeing you like this. I will leave you if you don't do anything. Apparently that was the best motivational talk ever because he begins his career in politics and literally just decides to become a Republican right on the spot. Oh, you know what? I'll go with that. That sounds good. And thus, he begins his political career, eventually leading into his vice presidency with George W. Bush. And then a little bit after that is where the story basically goes. Where do you guys want to start off with this one?
I think we should start off with Christian Bale's performance, as well as the dedication I think he put into this role.
Yeah, so we'll start with that. Okay, so starting off with Christian Bale's performance. So we got... Let's talk about the biggest thing here, the makeup. I mean, how amazing did that look on him?
Those prosthetics are some of the most, probably up to date. That's the state of the art right there. That is the best we're going to get with prosthetics as of right now in the film industry. And it really shows. It's amazing.
I agree.
Super unsettling though. Really, like I'm watching and I was like, oh my gosh, I've seen so many movies with all these actors, and it just it initially gave me the creeps, and then you adjust to it.
Because you really do forget that it's Christian Bale, and that you're not watching. I don't know who mentioned it was Joe or Matt, but they saw a clip from in the movie of like a baseball game and Dick Cheney out on the field, and they couldn't tell if it was Dick Cheney, like not found footage, but footage of Dick Cheney, or if it was Christian Bale just living in that moment on the baseball field.
Yeah, and that really is a testament to like the makeup and Bale's performance overall, which, by the way, like the most limited amount of dialogue up until the very end. And I thought that was kind of neat. The fact that he was so powerful and silent throughout the film, not silent in like, he was a man of few words until the very end when he's having that interview and he's talking like, and he gives kind of breaks
whole,
the fourth wall.
Yeah, that huge like screw you monologue at the end, which is one of the most, that's one of my favorite moments of the film. I won't give that away, but that is a testament to also his performance, because you could put on as much makeup as you want and make literally transform Christian Bale into Dick Cheney, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be convincing if you don't just absolutely nail those mannerisms of Dick Cheney, which is something that Christian Bale pulled off in such a beautiful way, to the point where it's like you have to wonder if maybe Christian Bale just stalked Dick Cheney for a little bit.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, okay, like this is how he walks. This is how he looks when he thinks about things. It's really something special that he.
Oh yeah, and you know what? Even too, his mouth in this movie, he like somehow perfectly replicates how Dick Cheney would talk, or just stare at people. Like, I mean, just little things like that. Like, the mouth itself could be nominated for an Oscar. It'd be like Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, and then Christian Bale's mouth as Dick Cheney's mouth. It could literally be two separate performances in this movie.
Yeah, it was definitely weird, like how he definitely moved his mouth in a way like he'd side talk, and it was what Chris is doing pretty much.
It's like moving his lips around, just like quietly thinking, like making half smirks.
Yeah,
just, like,
well, he does what Gerard Butler does.
Yeah, and in that regard, it was like powerful, but like in the least popular way for us.
It's a huge theme of the movie. They give you this quote right away, and this is not verbatim, but it's a proverb about somebody. That the quiet man sits by and they analyze, and they don't do anything at first, but they are observing. And once all the loud big talkers are gone, that's when the quiet man strikes. That's when they're the most powerful. And that is especially true for Dick Cheney, and that is totally shown through Bale's performance of this quiet, reserved politician who is kind of crass in front of others, but just reserved and a well-mannered guy in front of others, until he gets into this point of power to where he just he bulldozes the entire playing field.
Well, you want to make a point right now, because we had to move you to a different studio since we were having audio issues.
Got myself comfortable here. It was just like the side talk, like how he talked out of the side of his mouth was like he just kept it so consistent throughout, and like he nailed it. And then, like, I don't know if it was McKay or if it was Bale, but, like, the walk that he did, like, going down that hallway was like, wow, that guy's powerful.
Yeah.
Like, it was ridiculous how, like, he nailed it, like, made himself seem, like, way more powerful than, like, just a guy walking down a hallway. So that part of it was cool, and I think Bale really nailed it.
Well, also, I think it's incredible dedication that he went through such a dramatic, like, body transformation as well for the role. We've seen that in the past. Didn't he do a film where he was like really, really thin?
Yeah, so he did two films. He did like, I forgot one, I think it was The Machinist or something.
Machinist.
The Machinist, there we go. And then The Fighter, where like, I mean, he became like anorexic. And then American Hustle, in this one, he gained pounds. And then we had him as Batman, where he had to get fit and ripped. It's like, what is Christian Bale's actual real form in life? Like, what does he actually look like?
It's super interesting. We brought up The Machinist. This is a trait of Christian Bale, and I guess a trope is this but body transformation, where he will lose all this weight in such a dramatic way, more than likely unhealthy for a film like The Machinist. And then 8 months later has to start production on Batman Begins and gains all this weight and automatically just gains this boxer build and is this huge ripped dude, to the point where you have to question, like, this is true dedication to the art form, but you really do have to wonder, is this healthy? Is this going to shorten his lifespan? I mean, literally, I'm worried for him.
I remember when Chris Pratt hosted SNL, in his opening monologue, he sung this song about how he was even changing his body when he had to become Star-Lord after playing Andy on Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
And he says, my body's going to hate me. I'm probably going to die at like 45. I imagine this is going to happen to Christian Bale, though, not Chris Pratt.
Oh, of all people. No, yes, of course.
Jack,
He's gone both ways.
You got anything to say, man?
No, I'm letting it develop. I like hearing all these ideas because I'm still, again, I went with the, let me watch the movie. I went to a 3:35 showing, like, I guess that would be less than 5 hours ago. So it's all very fresh, and I'm developing everybody's opinions first. Maybe I'll just have to keep rolling with that. Don't watch the movie until hours before we have to talk about it.
Yeah, it seems to be working. It seems to be working in terms of diversifying the opinions.
We found our own Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
It's Jack. He's
just sitting there.
Silent.
Lets everyone else talk first.
You don't have to tell everybody that I'm that powerful.
Yeah, you should have played it off as a power move.
At the end of this show, he's going to take over, and it's going to be called the Jack Jamboree.
There you go.
Variety Viso is no more. All right, let's move on. Does anybody else want to make a comment real quick about Christian Bale's performance before we move on to another topic? All right. Another thing I enjoyed about this movie was McKay's writing and directing. I mean, I never got to see The Big Short. The only things I've seen of The Big Short have been clips on YouTube where it's like they have to explain how the stocks work, and like it would be like, and now let's cut to Margot Robbie in a bubble bath to explain that. And you're like, it does like these fourth wall breaks. So I was not really familiar with how his style worked other than that. I gotta say though, I really enjoyed it in this film. I love the fourth wall breaking moments where it's like, they, for instance, go to a dinner and the waiter, instead of like reading what's on the menu, he's reading like what type of bills they can pass to basically like, declare on like, people or what, war moves they can make and everything. I also love anytime Christian Bale, I know it sounds weird, anytime Christian Bale, when he's playing Dick Cheney, has a heart attack, like the record stops
he's
or
just
something.
So casual. He's like, oh, yeah, it's a heart attack.
Like, like the music will be playing during a montage, and then you hear the record literally rip, and then it'll be like, all right, I need to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But, what did you guys think of McKay's writing and directing?
Yeah, the directing, it's clear. If you've seen Big Short, it's very McKay. Like it's super contemporary, this like contemporary style where it like does these like big cuts, time jumps, and all these kinds of stuff where they break the fourth wall, and it's almost like designed for people with like ADD. Like,
Yeah.
it would jump to 2001, and then it's like, oh, but just kidding, we're back in the 60s, and it was like, all right, that's a little much. But
Yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, you go.
It kind of feels like if Guy Ritchie decided to get political, and when he's directing films, like that type of pacing is very evident in this film.
Yeah.
It had a lot of like what was really good about The Big Short. That's like one of my favorite movies. Like after seeing Vice, I went home right away and watched Big Short because like I needed more of that McKay. But like this one, it did so well at jumping back. Like it would jump back to him in Montana, then jump back to him at like a presidential ball, like seeing George W. drunk. Like it was so good at like and it was very good at keeping you like you have to know what's going on. You have to be locked in from the start to know what's going on. But if you do it's a big reward because it's really cool.
And that's the thing too. It kind of just hooks you in with that style. Like it draws you in because it's so like. The word I keep coming back to is like modern or contemporary. It's just very to 2019, 2018 style.
It's very interesting you say that because Adam McKay, I'm not sure about his directing credits, but just scrolling through his IMDb, we found that these type of movies aren't the only ones that he's written before. He's also written stuff like Step Brothers and the Anchorman movies, which is interesting to hear at first, but that's really his trademark, is this semi-political statement, but also this real American satire on American culture that Adam McKay has really started to sharpen and hone in with films like Big Short and Vice. Of course, Vice and Big Short are in a bit of a different arena than Anchorman and Step Brothers, but that is very interesting to see how his style has developed over the years.
It's kind of like watching somebody like they're going through like their college years and making movies, like they're making like all these like you got stuff like Anchorman, you got stuff like Step Brothers that they're making, and all of a sudden he's just like, I want to do something legit for once, and then like it works out for the best, and then he's just like, you know what, I'm gonna keep going with this and see why I can keep going.
I made a movie that's like a satire on news anchors and how silly they could be. Let's try the stock market, the 2008 stock market collapse. I'll try that.
There was definitely, like, you can see Adam McKay all over it, and I know him more familiarly with a lot of the mid to late 2000s, early 2010s comedies. Normally he's working with Will Ferrell. That was, I think, Funny or Die is the two of them.
Yeah, and the other guys as well, which is one of my favorite comedies.
Well, Funny or Die that's internet stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you know what he does in humor, and I saw The Big Short. I want to say I saw it last year, maybe 2 years ago, not right when it came out, and I liked it. I thought it was great, and you could still kind of see the Adam McKay direction or production style involved. He clearly had a hand in it, and that's definitely evident in Vice. I didn't like the way that it fit the story of Vice. It felt a lot like The Big Short, and I'm working as we're talking it out as a group on pinpointing what it is about Vice versus The Big Short that I did or did not like, because I do recognize this as an Adam McKay movie, and I like the way that he makes movies, but still for me, something just did not pan out the same, that I almost wanted less of the, hey, remember all these comedy movies I did? I'm going to run it sort of like that. It's cool to see as somebody who likes those comedies, but looking at this movie specifically, I think that though the direction was perhaps of good or high quality, it didn't sit well with me. It didn't feel properly spread out.
Was it just contrary to your expectations going into it?
I really had very little expectation going into it. I still, up until seeing the movie, wasn't sure what genre it was, and I've been told comedy. I left the movie and I thought, no, I don't think it's comedy.
It's a dark comedy.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on this. This is actually one criticism I had with it, which was the tone at times can feel a bit odd. Like at times, Vice, I was thinking like you said, Jack. I was going into it and seeing that it was nominated for best comedy performance, all of that. I was like, okay, this is a comedy. Going into it now, coming out of it, it's like there are some moments where I feel like the tone kind of doesn't match sometimes. Like you have these, like I said, I love the fourth wall breaking moments, but then you have moments where it's like Christian Bale and Amy Adams are playing their characters very seriously, and then you get these like moments where it's like you have like Steve Carell's character or it's Sam Rockwell. It's like they're playing more of a caricature of that political figure, and sometimes it just didn't match. And then you have other times too where it's like you have these fourth wall breaking moments, and it's followed up by something very traumatizing, like you see like a bit of torture or something. It's kind of like, all right, the tone sometimes in the movie, it didn't bother me too much, but at moments I was like, it's not really mixing well, and I don't really see this much as a comedy than more of a, like Matthew said, maybe a dark comedy or a dramedy.
Yeah, and that was like the tone that it had, which was different from The Big Short, which is why I like The Big Short better, is like Big Short you had people to root for. Like these guys were like bet on the stock, like the stock market falling or whatever, and like you can root for them to get their money. In this movie, like who do you root for? Like, because it's like Dick Cheney's like doing not great things, and like and his wife's like being manipulative, and like there's nobody in this movie that's like, oh, he's a good guy, because they like all just have these bad qualities to them at points, which is like you don't really know who to root for in this movie.
That's really
which is tough.
Yeah, that's really interesting you point that out, because I was going to say if there's one person in this whole movie that keeps their hands clean, it's a very minor character, but they play a huge role, would be Mary Cheney, which is one of the daughters of Dick Cheney. But even then, she's kind of like complicit in all of the dirty deeds that's going on, and it's not like she's ignorant of them. She just isn't there when they're happening, so it's assumed that she's fine in all of this. So there really is no one in the film who's like completely innocent and that you don't have anybody to root for.
Yeah, that was that's one of my complaints as well, is that shift in mood and tone. By the way, we were just talking about that, and how like they would juxtapose like these like comedic like heart attack moments with like bombings in like Iraq and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, man, that's like some real stuff, and that's like really heavy.
And not only that, but I mean, you see the real world footage as well, like 9/11, and just actual like AC-130 footage of like somebody getting hit. It's just like, oh, okay, I did not expect this.
Yeah, but then like Will said, there's like no one to root for, and there is one moment of humanity that like Christian Bale portrays, and it's in regards to his daughters, Cheney's daughters, or his one daughter actually, and it's like, oh, he is human, but then it goes back to him being like this evil person.
I'd say it's less of being human and more of a lack of inhumanity in that scene.
Yeah.
Really.
Better way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that I find interesting, because if you observe this movie purely for its narrative, and it's like when you consider the fact that this is all based on, real stuff that happened or is suspected to have happened, then it just gets crazy and kind of demented. But Dick Cheney does kind of have this character arc where it's like the scene that Joe was talking about, where his wife basically tells him, like, you need to get your act together. That kind of, looking back on it from a certain point later in the film, you really understand that his whole character arc is that, like, he started doing this because he wanted to help his family, and then he kind of got drunk on this power, on this political power.
Well, it's not even him. It's also his wife, Amy Adams, who plays oh my God,
Lynn Cheney.
Thank you, Lynn Cheney, who I thought, like, once again, Amy Adams, fantastic actress. She did a great job here as well. But one thing I really liked about her character, at least the way the film portrayed it, like we've been saying, we're reviewing Vice, we're taking this as the film portrays and not our actual views, was that I kind of really loved seeing how, like, when she started getting involved in politics is when she kind of became a puppet of Dick Cheney. Kind of how people saw, how like this movie showed Dick Cheney being a puppet, not puppet, kind of how he was the puppet master for George Bush. I kind of saw Lynn Cheney being the puppet master of Dick Cheney, like kind of like steering him in certain pathways. Like, hey, you know what? How about you try going for this? Even like when he was offered the vice presidency, she was like, "Don't take it; it's a waste of time." And then like when he took it, then she was more involved because she saw what he was doing.
She definitely is the more opinionated one of the duo, and it's very interesting to see her being basically the one to drive him into making some of these decisions. And I want to give a quick tangent to Amy Adams' performance. I have met women like this, like that portray this type of character that Lynn Cheney is. Phenomenal job. I don't know how else to put it, but she is incredible as Lynn Cheney.
Right now, Chris Duffy's family is just like, wait a minute.
I didn't say that. Okay, all right.
Go on.
She was like definitely like the boss in that relationship. Like I think there's a quote at some point in the movie where it was like, whoever married Lynn Cheney was gonna become president or something like that.
Yeah.
Where it was like, it didn't matter who it was. She was gonna drive her husband to big things, and just because she could. And like it starts right from the beginning when she tells him, like, hey, you got to become something. And even when he's like sick and he's running for Senate or whatever, or House of Representatives, she basically won that campaign for him because he like couldn't do anything. And she's out she's out saying like all these things to like shirtless like dudes on the job. Like she's out campaigning for him, and she basically won an election for her husband, which was
it was Wyoming is where they were at, right?
It was pretty crazy. So
she even did that on his deathbed.
Yeah,
she was like, "You're not going anywhere.
No. You're staying right here."
Yeah.
We still got like 20 minutes left in this movie. We can't have you die just yet.
Any other points you guys want to make about Amy Adams or perhaps the tone of the movie in Studio B?
I think so. Christian Bale is one of the front runners. I'm looking at odds checker right now on Oscar odds. Of course, I'm always looking at the odds. God knows who to bet on. Rami Malek is the only one ahead of Christian Bale, and I think he did a great job. And part of it, I think, is masked by the getting into character physically. Like all of that conditioning, I think, really appeals to people outside of how they portray the character. And I think Christian Bale did a good job. I think Amy Adams did a good job. I just wasn't quite as awestruck with their performances. They seemed like impassioned performances, but nothing unique to what I've seen. And I think part of it is the way that they acted versus the way that the movie was directed were so opposite. If you were to watch a traditional dramatic political movie, I feel like their acting performances are very standard for that. But because everything was set up differently and tone is a big part of that, it just felt like the dramatic moments felt extra dramatic within the movie. I'm not talking about real life footage because obviously those are designed to be super visceral for people who experience things.
Yeah,
it's a really good point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Chris wants to make a point real quick. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
No, we've been touching on this difference between The Big Short and Vice, and we've been talking about fourth wall breaks and how where they work, where they don't. I definitely feel like in some segments the comedic relief has purpose and it works well and doesn't clash with anything, or it serves as juxtaposition in a healthy manner. But there are sometimes not even as much as tone as much as it feels like it's dumbing things down as a Saturday morning like political civic class lesson. instead of I don't know how to phrase it. Instead of didn't need to happen where in Big Short we're talking about financial jargon that not the layman doesn't understand, whereas political jargon, although may need some exposition, is a bit easier to swallow, especially in a two-party American system where this kind of thing, the unitary, I don't know what the phrase is, but it's a little easier to understand and didn't really need to be dumbed down as much.
All right, Matthew, what were you saying?
So to Chris's point, and this goes into what I was going to say anyway, I actually really like the way that they explained things in this film, because you're talking about a film that's clearly trying to make a statement, clearly trying to be sort of morbidly entertaining and tell this very interesting life story, but it also has to touch on a lot of very controversial topics. And what I really, really like is that they explain stuff like the response to 9/11 and like the Iraq War in a way that it touches on things that even I have been confused about hearing about it like years later. Like, you know, it touches on the confusion amongst U.S. citizens and also the manipulation of information and like the motives, the political motives versus the reasons that everybody in society kind of believed that we were fighting these wars for.
And that part too is like one of my favorite moments in the movie, because I mean, okay, this is something based on, I think, of all of our ages. This was something that I think all of us were around for. I think all of us were alive when 9/11 happened. That like I remember like newscasts and just like, you know, as like the Iraq War was developing, I just remember seeing stuff as a kid, just like little glimpses on CNN or just my parents even talking about how they just didn't understand why we were going to certain areas and why we were going to Iraq and why we were getting involved. And it was cool actually just seeing in the movie how that was happening, or in like just that perspective at Washington D.C. And then like I was like, oh, I remember this happening at home.
A lot of parallels can be drawn too from what was in the movie versus like this, not necessarily just the rise to power, but some of the side players. Very easily you can draw parallels to many political structures, including the one that we have now, especially with information and the role that media plays in society, which on the one hand is cool, but on the other hand, I felt like there was a lot of it's topical, here it is 2 inches from your face, very frontal about, hey, you can draw the parallels yourself. We're never going to say it, but they kind of hinted almost using current events, I feel at times, and how they would have been portrayed. This movie set it up as almost a more modern take, as how we talked about the production, but even some of the dialogue felt more modern than maybe what actually happened. And I feel like the political elements of the movie were so obvious. Of course, it's a political movie. They have to rely on politics. But for me, there was a lot less movie and a lot too much, I don't know if it's political opinion or political reporting based on what your knowledge of things is. For me, that was another negative of Adam McKay accumulated this information, things that he wasn't able to fill the gaps for, he filled with movie devices, and then he put it in front, but it was just way too close for my eyes.
I will say the last 20 minutes, I think, does get a bit overboard of like, you could tell McKay was like, no, I'm going to go really into just ripping on Dick Cheney. Like the last 20 minutes especially is just like, oh my God, yeah, you're just like going all in now. You're just saying how much you hate this man. And just like maybe even Republicans in general. Like I did feel that, especially like I said, last like act of the movies where it really hits home.
Yeah, because I mean, I think, and this is the thing, like watching this film, not knowing much about Dick Cheney prior to watching the film, I ingested, the narrative as exactly that, just a narrative. I knew it was based in actual events and a real person. But part of me kind of found, and this is again testament to Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, part of me kind of enjoyed watching his journey up until those last 20 minutes where they really hit home. It's like, yeah, this is the part where he kind of does the heel turn, and you're like, oh, yeah. He's done some really messed up stuff and is has had a hand in a lot of really gnarly things that have happened in American history.
Yeah. Alex, Will, you guys want to add on to this?
There was a moment where they started showing like current events and all the stuff. It was the last 20 minutes where you said like they just started showing like everything going on.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird because, and I'm not taking sides, but does all the blame fall on that one person? And that's what they're trying to show, kind of. And it's like, not really. I mean, there was a lot of players that were involved in this, and it was just a little aggressive. Like you were saying, it was just a bit too in your face almost.
And I think it was like McKay, like he kept it so like he tried to play both sides. Like he tried to keep it fair for like, and then last 20 minutes hit and he was like, okay, I think Cheney was a bad guy. I'm going to tell you why. Like,
exactly.
He really wanted to tell you why. And he took the last 20 minutes to do it. And like, even in like the part I didn't like was the post-credit scene where like,
there was a post-credit scene.
You didn't know, Jack?
I didn't know that until 5 minutes ago. I just
and it's like
that.
It's like they're just throwing it.
Yeah,
they're
Dick
like,
Cheney's coming back in Endgame for Avengers.
But they're like back with that support group, and it's like they're just throwing everything in. They're just throwing everything in your face. Like,
like,
this was
literally
liberal.
brings up like
blah blah blah. And
liberals.
people are like fighting about.
Oh,
it.
that was the one part that I genuinely just was not entertained by.
Because
at
there's
the
like
end.
no point. Like it was like.
And I was so confused by it too because like I hate to spoil the end credit thing, but it is just out of nowhere. It just didn't feel right. Like
at first, it was funny because they did another fourth wall break, but then you saw where it was going, and I was like,
and then the way it ends too, with like character going, that new Fast and Furious movie looks lit, and you're just like,
and it's
what?
Like, oh, okay.
But then I'm like,
terrible.
But then I'm just like, when was this shot?
That was like the least connected to like any moment. That was like something from 2017 or something.
So
like,
let's go to
dated.
a pretend world then, where somebody didn't stay and see the mid-credit scene. The way that the actual movie ends, and that's how I saw it because I didn't know there was anything. I left as the credits started. The actual way the movie ends was also super disappointing. For me, where it's another fourth wall break and it's very direct, it's very forward, and it felt like I was supposed to be watching Dick Cheney provide his opinion on what you just watched 2 hours of.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't. It was a director telling an actor how to portray this person who had intentionally no hand in making the film, and probably rightfully so. I can't imagine Dick Cheney or his family would be too pleased with the outcome. But that was another one. It ended so cold and so abruptly, where I feel like I wasn't a fan of how slow the first half of the movie was, the build-up. But then you spend all this time building this character, nuanced relationships. We get to meet a handful of different minor characters that are really important political figures. And then by the time we get to the end of the movie, Will, it's as you said, it was just like, here's why I hate Dick Cheney. And I'm like, wait a second. I didn't like your build-up, but you spent all that time and all that detail, every line of conversation about this guy and his actions, and then you just throw it all away at the end. And that left me super disappointed. I'm glad maybe I would have been more disappointed if I stayed for this extra credit scene.
Yeah. Oh, God, I was gonna make some point that you were saying, but well, go ahead. I'll try to remember.
But like the one thing that like I can give him credit for is like that movie. I really liked this movie, and he had me convinced. Like at the end when he started doing that, I was like, yeah, like Dick Cheney sucked. Like yeah, like he was doing bad things. Like because McKay did such a good job like building it up, then hitting you with it. So I mean, he didn't need to go there. Like if he would have just kept it the same way he did, it probably would have been a little better ending. But he did such a good job that I was like, all right, I'm with you. Like, nice job, dude. You nailed it, and I'm with you.
Chris, go ahead.
I will say I do strongly disagree with you, Jack. I will explain.
I'm gonna have my button on the mic.
Don't worry. No, I'm not gonna. It won't get there. But the way that Christian Bale delivers this last monologue is Dick Cheney basically saying like, "No, I'm not sorry." Is very much, if you know anything about Dick Cheney, about his personality, that is 100%. That is 100%. I think how Dick Cheney would feel. That is not a comment on politics, anything. Dick Cheney is a very proud person, does things in his interest, in what he thinks is right. And that is kind of the attitude he's carried before in the real world of he doesn't care what you think. He's going to do what he thinks is the right thing. So that last monologue bit is very reminiscent of Dick Cheney during his tenure as a vice president and also as afterward, too, and giving commentary on contemporary American politics. Nothing to do with his actual political beliefs, but that is definitely a reflection, a parallel to his actual personality, and I thought it was delivered well. And like it's already been said, the last 20 minutes were kind of like overkill on like, Dick Cheney is this guy. But I will also say like it's not portrayed inaccurately. It's just like it is overwhelming. as I guess what we all.
And that's to the movie's credit that it all does make sense. And I totally agree with you. Whether I know Dick Cheney's personality outside of the movie, the way he ends that monologue to conclude the movie even fits what we saw within the movie. So you don't. I feel like somebody who doesn't know Dick Cheney outside of this movie would still be like, yeah, that makes sense based on how we saw him interact with people in positions of authority over him or people who he had authority over. So it fits. For me, it was more the setup of the interview where I don't know how close we are to finishing the movie. They set up this interview and the turn to the camera and speaking. It was more the setup. I do believe that the sentiments echoed by Christian Bale as Dick Cheney could be very apt for Dick Cheney as a person or as a character if you just look in the confines of the movie. It just, for like everything to conclude on that, that's what rubbed me the wrong way more so than with the message that was actually delivered, because that was, again, a testament to Christian Bale, a super believable message. I will add the final thing with me for a conclusion of the movie. I really thought, and with full knowledge that Dick Cheney is alive and that he could see this movie, I thought there was a really good chance that they were going to kill Dick Cheney off at the end. And as like he goes to the hospital and he has more heart attacks and all of a sudden he has fractured relationships, he, fires one of his buddies and his family's spiraling out of control. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to kill Dick Cheney in this movie. And then it didn't happen.
I think that would have been going overboard with it, though.
Yeah, I think that would have been more overboard than any of the other stuff. And even because I forget who mentioned, I think it may have been you, Alex, but we were mentioning how they kind of, it's implied that they almost put all the blame on Cheney. And the way that they tell the story and the fact that it is a movie about him, it would give that impression. I would say it's probably more telling that the film is talking about just one man who manipulated a system that has significant flaws, and that it's like this man manipulated the system, and then we therefore had events happen that created the environment for some of the modern politics that we see today, which, again, could be seen as, like overdoing it or being too, upfront or dumbing things down. But I just really appreciate the film going to the lengths to take a dark comedy like this to try and explain a lot of very complicated information in a way where I walked out of this film being like, I think I understood that, which is not something I can usually say about politics. And in a time where, finding truth in political reporting of any kind is difficult. It's difficult to trust sources, and I know this isn't like a source. It's a movie. It's a bunch of artists coming together to give their opinion, supported by a lot of information that is factual for what they could find. I appreciate the film for trying to explain these things in such a way, and if they had to do it by making it a dark comedy, all the better.
Did you guys ever make a point, Alex, Will?
Go ahead, Will.
I mean, it's like, and they said it right from the start. Like, the first thing you see is like, we don't know a whole lot. Like, we don't know if all this is true. We did our best. Like, that was the first thing they said, was like, we did our best to find out, but he's super private and we don't know if this is all true. So, I mean, I think like them acknowledging that from the start is important for you to understand that, like, hey, maybe this isn't all how it goes down, but this is how we saw it and this is how we're going to tell it. So that was important that they got that out in front of, like, ahead of time.
Yeah. And I think I misconstrued it kind of like that whole last 20 minutes. I can see how he was the catalyst for a lot of events happening now, and that's probably what was going on. And in my head, I was thinking it's something else, so I'm kind of dumb for that.
Yeah. No, you're completely fine.
No.
And I was actually going to go right off that, what Matt said. This is the last 20 minutes, and the whole film really is not a book report on like all the evils of Dick Cheney necessarily. That is up to the interpretation of the viewer. Really, it's more, because that would straight up be slanderous. That the movie wouldn't get released. It's way more the influence that Dick Cheney had. It's not even the direct like Dick Cheney did this and this is what happened. It's more Dick Cheney saw something in our system that was flawed and was able to capitalize on that for whatever reason, for personal interest, for what he thought was right, and because of that, there was this domino effect that happened later that affects current contemporary politics or the state of America during the Iraq War. So it's much more, I feel, just a testament to that of how fragile a system we have in the context of the narrative and in reality, and how easily manipulated it can be by someone in that position of someone who is, like we said, the quiet one, who's reserved, who is watching all the time, but when everything falls silent, they're the one who strikes.
Yeah. And we didn't really talk much about the writing, and it's very Aaron Sorkin-y almost. Like I
feel that, yeah.
Yeah,
I get what you're saying.
And I feel like Adam McKay has taken inspirations from Sorkin, and maybe even like some little bit of Quentin Tarantino in some aspects of like, I don't know, just quick cuts and all that kind of stuff. But it's super modern. I just can't get my head off that darn word. And it's just, I don't know. It's a definite movie for like someone that has almost like ADD, and they like are just throwing so much information back and forth. And it's kind of, which is kind of my complaint for it. Mm-hmm. It was a little scattered. And, but that's not to say it wasn't a bad movie because of that.
No, in terms of the filmmaking, that's definitely I think a praise, and for the narrative itself it can be a criticism praiseworthy, because if this is not to knock Anchorman and Step Brothers, but this is definitely a very matured version of McKay, and he does it excellently. For the narrative itself, we see us, especially in more modern times, like closer to the 2000 era, we are jumping all over the place. We're jumping between the affairs of Dick Cheney's of his daughters. We're jumping between him shooting the governor in the head, or I can't remember the whole event, but it's just thrown in there, jumping between Iraq, Afghanistan, all this other stuff. So in terms of filmmaking and editing, it's very smart and it's quick and it's awesome. But in terms of like delivering this narrative, I start to feel like, okay, where are we going? Because I feel like we're just like checklisting everything that's happened
there
ever.
definitely didn't seem like there was end in sight for sure.
Even the hunting incident, I was just kind of like, why was that thrown in there? Like, we didn't even have to actually see that. I was just kind of like thrown in there last minute, just another jab at Cheney.
It feels I think that was put in there because that's one of the only things I know about Dick Cheney was that like something about like something about he shot a guy
That's
or something
true.
like that.
I mean, like if you make a movie like this, it's like, wouldn't people be disappointed if they didn't talk about that scene? I guess, or that moment.
For me, it's more surprising that scene was just another drop in the pond. Mm-hmm. Like by the end of the film, it's like, oh, there's so many other things that I'm gonna remember Dick Cheney for now.
Which was kind of also a filler of his personality that, you know, truthfully, he did wait a long time to apologize to that dude. And they do say in the movie, like, you know, oh, look, somebody apologized. And as indicated by real life events as well, the guy Harry Whittington was the one who apologized to the Cheney family. And you see that in the movie. And that just sort of even more, I don't want to say the villainy of Cheney, but it solidifies the very standoffish role that he has when it comes to communicating with other people, where he is more invested in power at times than people. And you see that as opportunity for him, and other times you see that as struggle. So I thought the amount of time given on things like that, as well as the undercover operative who was married to the journalist that they touched on for a moment, those are two popularized Cheney events that then, you know, you get to see a little bit of and just adds to who he is.
All right. Does anybody else want to like make any last minute points about this? Because I want to move on to another topic real quick, because I want to touch on this actor because he's a big role in Dick Cheney's career. Anybody?
Nope. Go for it.
All right. Can we talk about Rockwell as George W. Bush?
Oh my gosh, so good. Rockwell, it's definitely characterized, but I definitely full on believe like that's George Bush.
So, okay, here's the thing. Even though he was very characterized and like was goofy and everything, the way I saw this is how Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney saw George W. Bush.
Oh, yeah.
This is how they saw him, as like the mess up of the family, the one that like, oh, he's going to be president, so we just have to work with him and whatnot. Like, this is how I saw that character, was like, we're seeing George W. Bush from Dick Cheney's point of view, like the way he saw him and the way he could manipulate him. Because the scene where he convinces him to let him be his vice president, you see him, like, it literally cuts back to him fishing in a pond, like literally saying hook, line, sinker.
Oh no, that scene in particular, out of context, IGN threw up that like sneak peek for Vice, and out of context, everybody thought, wow, this movie is edited so poorly, like this is gonna suck. But then when you see it with the context of the film and how it's a metaphor for Cheney's pastime, for Cheney's just likes to fish as a hobby, and he's fishing Bush right now for his own personal gain, is so brilliantly done. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie is their discussion.
Yeah, and that was built up long before even, I think Bush was even introduced in the movie. Like I remember just random cutaways to like him just like walking through like the water and stuff like that, about to fish, and I was wondering like, what's that going to lead to? And again, this is another movie where like every shot has a purpose. That all leads to that moment where he like gets that position.
Yeah. And I just love Sam Rockwell as Bush. I think he did a great job. Like I said, I mean, it is a very characterized performance, but I mean, it was a lot of fun. Out of the ones that we have, like Will Ferrell, Josh Brolin, and Rockwell, I think Rockwell's my favorite, honestly.
Yeah, that's actually a really awesome point, Joe. How we're seeing a lot of characters in Chaney's eyes, and that makes sense like so much in regards to that movie. And Rockwell just did a really good job being like this like almost comedic relief in a sense, and he just pulled it off so well.
He's the goofy cowboy president.
Yeah,
and like that's totally what he took, and that's how he ran with it, and he did an amazing job. Even reliving some of those true scenes. One of my favorite Bush moments, for better or for worse, was the major combat in Iraq on the destroyer. Seeing that relived through Rockwell, it's different, but it's still a believable Bush, and it's amazing what he's done with it.
Yeah.
From the viewer's perspective too, I think we can kind of, and we almost have, associated the Amy Adams, Christian Bale characters as more serious, more dramatic, and Sam Rockwell, Steve Carell filling more of the comedic end, which for me, Rockwell did way better. Steve Carell, I felt like his character, the way it was portrayed, whether that's accurate of Rumsfeld or not, was very much like, oh, I'm the comedic relief guy. Whereas with Rockwell, you didn't feel like there was ever a line delivered where it's like, I am trying to make you laugh. It sometimes felt a little out of place in the scene within the movie, because that's how these conversations are supposed to be imagined. None of it was ever too unbelievable to me as what could have actually went down. And one thing I did have with the George Bush character, less of Sam Rockwell, is as they're saying maybe Dick Cheney did all this horrible stuff, whether they're pinning it all on one person, saying he's the primary catalyst, it does seem to sort of, obviously the movie is called Vice, but it does seem to minimize George Bush's role. Whether I know if that's accurate or not is beyond me, but I felt Rockwell did exactly what he was supposed to and really accomplished that comedy part of the comedy drama without clearly being a comedic relief character.
Will, you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like Rockwell, like, once he got going, it was like, okay, I believe that's George Bush. And, like, with Christian Bale and Dick Cheney, right away, you don't think it's Bale. And Amy Adams, it's Lynn Cheney. But then Steve Carell was like, the whole time it was like, oh, that's Steve Carell.
Yeah.
He's just being exactly Steve Carell.
Say, I don't know if it's because of his laugh. I don't know if it's because Rumsfeld was very underdeveloped in this movie. Like, I mean, he's barely in the movie. I mean, also, too, Rockwell, I think, is barely in the movie, but he has such a bigger impact with his performance than Steve Carell did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed like you could never get Steve Carell out of your head with that. And that's what was one problem I had with that. But another thing is, I think we missed a great, like, when he first talks to George W. when he's the governor and he's throwing the baseball around.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know, I might be the commissioner of baseball, like, laughing. Mm-hmm. We missed a great out. Like, he should have been the commissioner of baseball. He would have killed that. Like, baseball would be so cool now. And so, like, can you, like, just imagine George W., commissioner of baseball, that would be awesome. So I think we missed a big opportunity with that.
I really wish he was in the movie more. I wish we did get to see more of, like, what Jack was saying, like Cheney and Bush in the film together a lot more than we did in this.
Yeah, and just to go on top of what Will was saying, that was definitely just Steve Carell. Like, in The Big Short, he definitely disguises himself well, and that's like, oh yeah, he's playing a person.
He
I
like
totally
makes
believe
The
it.
Big Short for me. Like, he dominates that movie. Him and Gosling dominate that movie.
Absolutely.
Well, I was going to say Foxcatcher, where he plays as John DuPont, the Olympic trainer or the owner of that Olympic Team. He totally transformed himself as that when Steve Carell was in that movie. But like this, I mean, I just was like, oh, that's his character from The Office.
It was more like, it was like Michael Scott. Like, Michael Scott's playing Donald Rumsfeld.
I don't know about that. I haven't seen a lot of Steve Carell's more like serious roles or more dramatic roles. I mostly know him for a lot of the dumb funny stuff. But for me, I actually thought that I enjoyed Carell as Rumsfeld a lot more than Rockwell as Bush, but I do think they were both really, really good.
I do want to add on, kind of in Matt's boat, I still prefer Sam Rockwell as Bush, but I feel like we have been harping on Carell as Rumsfeld, and definitely he's one of the minor, not as noteworthy characters, but I think that is less to do with Carell's performance, because honestly, between the six of us, do we know a lot about Donald Rumsfeld?
Not at all.
And the thing is, he's a very pivotal character in terms of the real world as Secretary of Defense during the Bush administration. But that's the thing. Like, he's not a really compelling character in a film. At least they didn't take enough creative liberty there to really make him a compelling character, whereas he was more of a comedic relief. So I don't think that's less to Steve Carell's performance, but rather that Rumsfeld is not really developed as well in this film as others.
I think that his role in the film is really spectacular when it comes to how his involvement in the film, like how he starts in the film, and then how he comes back later when Cheney has kind of obviously risen through the ranks. It kind of is a reflection of how Cheney has evolved and almost surpassed Rumsfeld. So I think Rumsfeld didn't really have to do much more in the film. I think what he had to do to be memorable and to leave an impact was done already.
All right, I hate to do this right now, but it is 8:56 and we got to wrap this up.
All right.
So I'll go first. Will, since this is like your first time on here, we do the normal grading scale that goes with school, so A's, B's, and C's. So we'll have you go on in just a second, but I'll go me, Chris, and then we'll go to you guys. All right, for me, I really did enjoy this. I actually found it interesting that, as Jack pointed out, for the two runner-ups basically for the Oscars is both Christian Bale and then Rami Malek. But both these movies have a very low Rotten Tomatoes score. They're both in the 60s, but however, their main actor performance, I think, is what's really carrying it at the box office and word of mouth for a lot of people. And for me, it's kind of the same. The main reason to see this movie for me is Christian Bale as Dick Cheney. I thought he was the best thing about it. I think he is going to get the Oscar. Other than that, though, I mean, I did enjoy McKay's directing. I want to check out The Big Short more than ever now. Amy Adams, like I said, she was fantastic. She was as good as her lead, and I enjoyed Rockwell. Some bads. I felt like near the end it gets a little bit biased, especially the last act, like we said. And sometimes I felt the tone can feel a bit odd. And like I said, Rumsfeld, but you made a great point, Chris. What do we really know about him? Even though I felt he was underdeveloped, that is a good point. I really don't know much about the guy. But for me, I did enjoy this a lot. Is it going to be in my top 10? Probably not. But I did enjoy enough to give it a B+.
So my main takeaway is that it got my blood boiling by the end, and I think that's I'll leave that to the imagination, but that's definitely a good thing in terms of film and in terms of cinema. Amazing performances by the cast members. Adam McKay really knocked it out of the park in some areas. It kind of dropped the ball in others, but definitely is one of his better films. I still like Big Short better, so I'll say that. Just want to quickly say, Tyler Perry as Colin Powell is still blowing my mind. So that's just the last thing I want to say. I'm giving this film an A-.
Alex, go ahead.
Pretty much what everyone said. The tone was just all over the place, and there was some good. Obviously, Christian Bale, Amy Adams, fantastic, and I hope Christian honestly goes away with the Oscar. I thought he's been really great, and I don't know, he just deserves it. It seems like. Overall, the movie I think did lack. A Big Short I did like better, like you and Will were saying, Chris. And I think I'm gonna give probably a B to B+.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm at B+ too, because just for reference, Big Short's an A+ for me. I love that movie, but I love McKay, and just the performances were great, and it was the story just had its moments where it was okay, what's the point? Or let's go. Pick it up. And so that was the one bad I had with it. That probably knocks it down to B+. But again, I mean, Bale for the Oscar, I'm all in on, except maybe Cooper, because that's...
Yeah, that was my other pick, too.
That's my number one movie of the year. So, that's...
I still have to see that.
Jack needs to tell me what odds I can get on Cooper, but I'm all in on Bradley Cooper, Oscar. But again, Vice, B+ for me.
All right, Mr. Fresh Jack.
I think whether it was a benefit or not, just seeing this movie, I still have pretty good recall for everything that happened, but some of the discussions here were enlightening, so it may sound goofy, but it did give me a better opinion of the movie than when I first walked out of the theater. I didn't think too many of the portrayals were amazing. I thought that a lot of the situational things we talk about, Carell wasn't the best Rumsfeld. Okay, well, we know Rumsfeld from the early 2000s, not so much as a representative. And it didn't fit the movie, but he fit the character well. Whereas Rockwell didn't fit the character well for me, but he fit the movie. And that there are different goals. There were a lot of all over the place tone, pacing, things like that. So, as I said, you guys did bump me up from a plus to a minus. That's why I'll give this a C-.
Oh my God, you went a D+.
Oh my God.
This
aggressive.
I'll agree with Joe. This is not in my top 10 movies of the year. I don't know that I saw 10, but I'll happily put it at 11.
Did Jack just beat me for like hardest grader?
I think he did.
All right, Matt, you want to try to beat Jack last minute?
Well, I think I'm probably going to be the most radical in terms of grading this. I really like this movie. I think I've just generally decided that I love political fiction, and I really need to watch more of it because this just, like what with Chris, it didn't quite get my blood boiling, but just after watching it, I was like, I felt like I learned a lot. I felt like I got a lot of great insight. I think that the character arc of Dick Cheney, both knowing that it's a real person, but also observing it as a character arc, I see this incredible story of a guy who basically was told, like, you need to change or otherwise you're going to lose me by Amy Adams. And he rises through ranks. This movie could have been called, like, The American Dream or something like that. He basically is like, hey, I'm going to beat the odds of this political system, and then ends up becoming a villain by the end of it. And something about the whole journey just kept my interest the entire way. And really just kind of opened my eyes to a sector of, to entire aspects of American politics I never thought about, or I never connected the dots. I'm going really radical with this. I'm giving this movie an A+. I loved this movie.
Whoa! All right, hold on. Let's do a recap real quick. I gave it a B+. Chris?
A-.
Matt. Alex?
B+.
Will?
B+.
Matthew?
A+.
And then Jack?
C-.
What the
Man, we are all over the map on this. Adam McKay is gonna come and attack Jack or something.
I like all your other movies, Adam. Just I would have been fine without this one.